to tell you all about all this stuff. What was actually happening that night, what everyone was so angry about, what the backlash was. Cliff Notes version, you had 8 British soldiers and their commanding officer against several hundred irate Bostonians clinging pretty much everything they could get their hands on. That evening ended well for nobody, but especially poorly for the 5 Bostonians who died when those 8 British soldiers finally decided enough was enough, and in self-defense, admittedly, opened fire into that crowd. Those were the first casualties of the American Revolution, but sadly, far from the last. Off to your right, you might notice the tea kettle above the Starbucks off to our right, and the steam pouring out of the spout. Every now and then we drive past this thing and nothing's happening. Hold that thought. Once wouldn't be a big deal. 3 times in a row, I might start wondering if that Starbucks was potentially in violation of its lease. Which would be a pity, because that Starbucks kind of has a good thing going there. That is a corner location right by City Hall. They want to keep it. They're supposed to keep that kettle intact, shiny, and operational. It's been steaming away in that general area since the 1870s, when it was first built as the emblem of the now long defunct Oriental Tea Company. To our left, I give you dead people. I'll have about 12,000 more of them for you in a block, but that is the oldest burial ground in the city. King's Chapel Burial Ground, like Boston itself, dates back to the year 1630, when a guy named John Winthrop, our first governor, who is buried there, led a group of English Puritans down from Charlestown, which they had settled 1 year prior, to give us the city of Boston nearly 400 years ago. Have any of you heard of the Puritans before? Oh, okay, a couple of you. Have you heard anything good? What's that? Oh, you did? Really? Kind of a cool place. Did they tell you about the subway vent? There's a subway vent right in there. Old Town Trolley's Ghosts and Gravestone tour tries to dress that up like it's a gateway to the underworld or something. So the Green Line runs right underneath it. It's a ventilation duct. But no, I ask because the people who founded this city are mostly known today for belts around their hats, hunting witches, and hating fun. It's the same cuddly bunch that gave us the Salem witch trials in 1692 and banned Christmas here for 22 years. Things change in 400 years, but I wouldn't exactly say this was a party town early on. Now this is basically the Hollywood Walk of Fame for dead people in Boston. The old granary. Very center, there's a stone obelisk that says Franklin on it. Benjamin Franklin, the guy in the $100 bill, is not here. He's in Philadelphia. But we've got his parents, and right behind them is a noted North End silversmith, goldsmith, coppersmith, artist, shameless plagiarist, amateur dentist, and most famously of all, equestrian. Paul Revere undertook his famous Midnight Ride 250 years ago this past April. Those 3 are looking at the final resting place of a Boston lawyer named James Otis. If you ever heard the phrase, taxation without representation is tyranny, that was him. You've got all 5 victims of the Boston Massacre, and you've got 3 signers of the Declaration of Independence. Sam Adams, Robert Treat Paine, John Hancock. The first signer of the Declaration of Independence, also when he died, richest guy in Boston, is the tall fancy one in the back. The fact that he was the richest guy in Boston is why he got the fancy one. Now, this is one of 16 stops along a 2.5-mile long red brick walking path through the greatest hits of the American Revolution we call the Freedom Trail. You can pick up one end of it at the Boston Common Visitor Center, which we'll be coming up on in just a couple blocks. I not dropped a number earlier, 12,000. That is the actual estimate for how many people are buried there. If it seems like a tight fit, thing to keep in mind, Boston, when it was first founded, was about a 40th the size of what we call Boston now. This is a map of Boston, dates back to circa 1770 or so. The old Shawmut Peninsula, all 1.1 square miles of it. Shawmut is an Algonquin Indian word. The local Massachusetts people that this state is named after who had been living in this area for about 6,000 years before the English showed up. For them, this was a very fertile seasonal fishing and hunting ground, but it was barely bigger than the North End is today. They got pretty efficient about using all the space they had, with the glaring exception of this thing, Boston Common. This was 50 acres of prime real estate, but in 1634, the Puritans set this aside as common land for the common good. Basically meant nobody would ever own this, but anybody could graze their cattle out here. Militia companies drilled here. There were public speeches, public sermons, only the occasional public hanging. Center of the action, basically. Oldest public park in the United States. However, if you note the bronze arms intertwined coming up off to our right, we call that statue the Embrace, and it's only been here for about 3 years. It's an artist's reimagining of a famous photograph, also called The Embrace, of Martin Luther King Jr. hugging his wife Coretta Scott at the news that he was being honored with the Nobel Prize back in 1965, which is lovely. But if any of you know anything about those two, you might be aware they were not from Boston. We have the statue because they met here as college students, which kind of fits. Because during the school year, roughly 1 in 3 people living in this city, comes to about 300,000, are living in this city because they are attending one of 36 colleges and universities you can find here. Couple blocks back, it was Suffolk University. Couple blocks more, it'll be New England Law Boston. There's Boston University. That's where King was earning his PhD, while Coretta Scott studied at the New England Conservatory of Music. You got Northeastern, Berkeley, Berkeley, nothing going California, UMass Boston, Bunker Hill Community College, Wentworth, Simmons. About 2 weeks ago, somebody made a sad face when I didn't give Tufts a shout out. Tufts is a kind of. Some of that's here, you can kind of count it, but their main campus is out in Medford. If you're waiting for the exhaustive list, it's not going to happen off the top of my head, but it's a lot. If you notice, I didn't mention Harvard or MIT in that list. That's because they're not in Boston. Cambridge is close, but it's one town over. I didn't mention Boston College because that's not in Boston. Newton, next town over from Cambridge, along with LaSalle. I live one town over from that, Waltham, the Watch City, home to both Bentley and Brandeis. This whole state, New England in general, is lousy with colleges. That all kind of starts with the Puritans. This is where they deserve a little bit of credit. When they came out here to build their ideal religious society, part of that vision was everybody would know the Bible here, cover to cover. Kind of requires that you've read it. You can't read the Bible if you can't read, which most people couldn't back then. Education was such a priority of theirs that back in 1636, just across the river, it was the Puritans who gave us the first college in North America. They just called it the college for the first 2 years. You don't really have to specify when it's the only one around, but they rebranded 2 years later. Probably know that as Harvard University now. That's what got the ball rolling on pretty much everything else. Right now, we are driving through the campus of Emerson College. It's a performing arts school, pretty good one. It should be. We're right in the middle of the theater district. If you like live performances, this is pretty much where you go for that, Boston. Emerson owns a pretty major chunk of it. They don't have 6 U.S. presidents among their alumni like Harvard does, but if any of you know your comedians, Bill Burr, Jay Leno, Dennis Leary, they all came through here. What about Henry Winkler? Anyone ever heard of him before? Best known as someone named Arthur Fonzarelli from a little sitcom called Happy Days back in the 70s. Although I personally have always made the case that Happy Days was at best his second greatest professional achievement. In 1985, Henry Winkler became the executive producer of my favorite 80s TV show. Does anybody remember MacGyver? Okay. If you never had the pleasure, Angus MacGyver was an ex-soldier, specifically a U.S. Army Explosive Ordnance Disposal Technician, EOD. If you ever saw The Hurt Locker, he was one of those guys. But when he fought the bad guys in his civilian life, he never used guns because guns are bush league. Any scrub can use a gun. A Swiss Army knife, that takes a legit badass. He would break out his Swiss Army knife. He would look around and whatever random junk he had lying around. Each and every week for 7 seasons, he would cobble all that together into some bonkers gadget to save the day. He once cuffed to an armored car with a blowtorch he'd made out of chewing gum and a rusty old bike. 30 years later, Richard Dean Anderson still remembered that as the dumbest thing he'd ever heard, but it was a great show. That was Henry Winkler. By the way, where we are now is kind of an important little dividing line. We are on Charles Street right now. It's called Charles Street because this is where the Charles River used to start. Everything to the west of that, this was all basically just water up until the latter half of the 19th century. It's why we call this neighborhood the Back Bay. Here, I showed you this earlier. This is the original city of Boston. It is a slightly more modern map of Boston. You got the original city right here, Charles River here. We are currently working our way through this light blue section. If you see light blue, it means it is part of Boston's land area today, but like 1/6 of that land area, roughly 5,000 acres. It is literally man-made from the ground up, filled in land. Basically, in 1857, the city of Boston purchased and then demolished a big old hill 9 miles south of here. It was called Needham Heights because it was in Needham, Massachusetts. Then they spent the next few decades bringing all that rubble up here by train, basically gradually worked their way west. They dumped it into the river until it wasn't the river anymore. They basically turned everything from here on for nearly 2 miles into land, and then they built everything you see around you on top of it. We just crossed over Arlington Street. Next we're going to turn right onto Berkeley. See, what they do is they would fill in just enough to lay down one street at a time. They would sell off housing plots on that street. That's how they would finance the fill-in and construction of the next one down. If we kept going, we would cross Clarendon, Dartmouth, Exeter, Fairfield, Gloucester, and Hereford streets. Then you get to Mass Ave. After that, you are in a neighborhood called the Back Bay Fens, home of Fenway Park. Fens is an old English word. It means stagnant water. So it used to be marshland out there. After that, that was only incorporated later, so kind of like the grid pattern you're seeing here kind of breaks down after that. But you would find Ipswich, Jersey, Kilmarnock, Lansdowne, and minor streets out there. Now, maybe not the most environmentally friendly approach for needing more space today, but they did make some pretty nice stuff out here. When we take this right turn over on Newbury Street, you should get a pretty nice look at the Church of the Covenant. It's the tallest church steeple in Boston, made out of something called Roxbury pudding stone, also known as church stone, because there are about 40 churches in the greater Boston area made out of this stone. The official stone of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, apparently. If you dig hard enough, there's an official just about everything. Apparently you can only find this stuff in Massachusetts and just off the coast of Morocco, which sounded a little strange to me when I first heard that. I always figured wherever you go, the planet's all made out of basically the same stuff, but I don't know, something continental drift. You guys ever heard the name Nancy Kerrigan before? Famous figure skater. She was married in there. It's probably a happier moment of her life than the other one she's kind of famous for. Also, a bit off to our left, that red and brown building right there. Well, today that's basically a fancy furniture store. It's called Restoration Hardware. But up until 1949, that was the Museum of Science. They didn't run out of space there and move to their current location out on the Charles River Dam until 1951. That building, it used to have a twin. If we'd gotten about a block further up, there's an H&M over there. It used to have something called the Rogers Building. That was the original campus of MIT when it first started in Boston's Back Bay as Boston Tech. They didn't move out to Cambridge until 1916. But Arlington Street Church one of the first buildings that went up in this neighborhood back in 1861. You can still find vintage photographs of it rising up above pretty much absolutely nothing. I kind of like pointing out this church for a few reasons. Every now and then we have some friends from across the pond with us. Whenever we have anyone from Great Britain potentially feeling a little bit homesick, I always point that out because it was designed to resemble the St. Martin in the Fields Church over in Westminster. About 3 weeks ago, I had a Londoner on board. I mentioned that little tidbit. I looked up at it, and I believe his exact words were, "Yes, I see the attempt." Makes it feel all warm and fuzzy, doesn't it? Also in 2004, the first church and state-sanctioned same-sex marriage in the United States took place in there. Only one on the first day. It's Massachusetts, but I think they were still being a little cautious. They wanted to see what the backlash was to that before they did anything else. Wasn't much. People basically just said, what do you know, didn't rain for 40 days and 40 nights. I guess we're good. Day 3, they had 50, and they haven't really stopped since. Now this is the Boston Public Garden. It predates the Back Bay by about 20 years, but it's also mainland. It opened in 1837. It's the oldest botanical garden in the country today. What you're seeing through the trees is something we call the Swan Pond, because it has been the home of Boston's famous swan boats ever since 1877. What you find in there from the beginning of April up until Labor Day is a fleet of 6 paddle boats, each with a pretty white swan figurehead. That will give you a lovely, scenic, relaxing 20-minute ride around that pond. You'd be supporting a local family business. It's still owned and operated by the same family, the Pagets, who started this almost 150 years ago. And while admittedly the price has gone up since then, probably not as much as you'd be expecting. It's about $5 a head. I always tell people, if you have kids with you, it's a good place to bring the family. If you don't have kids with you, it's a pretty popular place to bring a date here in Boston. It's a good way to make a good first impression without breaking the bank. That's pretty handy if you're, say, one of those 300,000 cash-strapped college kids we get every year. Also, not a terrible way to make a good 50th impression if you've been dropping the ball a little bit lately. Judgment-free duck. We all make mistakes. But that is Boston Common, directly ahead, once again, western edge of the original city. One thing I did not mention about it earlier was that at one time, half the British Army in Boston camped out here. And on the evening of April 18th, 1775, 700 of those British soldiers were sent out on a little secret mission by their overall commander, General Thomas Gage. They got on their boats right up there, Charles River, now Charles Street. They rowed their way across the river into Cambridge. They landed. They began their march through the night on the town of Concord, about 20 miles from here, with orders to seize or destroy a store of stolen weapons and ammunition that the ever bolder rebel scum had been stockpiling out there. Turned out that rebel scum had a pretty capable spy network. It was called the Committee of Public Safety. When they learned what the British were up to, they dispatched a number of riders out into the countryside, most famously Paul Revere, to warn everyone that they were coming. Around 5 in the morning, that British column marches into Lexington on their way to Concord, where they're confronted by 77 local militia. After a brief tense standoff, shots are fired. That is the beginning of the Revolutionary War, but that journey starts right there. By the way, off to your left, you might have to squint a little to see it, but out in front of the benches, can you guys make out the bronze ducks? There's a big one. It's being followed in a line by 8 little ones. That is Mama Mallard and her 8 kids. Jack, Tack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack. The kiddos were born a couple blocks that way on a little island out in the middle of the Charles River, but on a previous visit to the Swan Pond, Mr. and Mrs. Mallard noticed that folks riding those swan boats are in such a good mood that they're really generous throwing peanuts. Seems like a good place to raise a family. That is their new home, as soon as 8 baby ducks have dealt with Boston traffic. No bueno. Fortunately, they have befriended a local police officer named Michael, who was called ahead to have traffic blocked off in this intersection so that that family can make their way across Beacon Street onto the public garden. That is the plot of a children's book written back in 1942 called Make Way for Ducklings by an art student from Ohio named Robert McCloskey. who apparently was inspired by seeing an actual Boston police officer stopping traffic to let an actual family of ducks cross the street. He took a few creative liberties after that, but it's a charming read. If you ever want to check it out for free, make your way a little further into the Back Bay, find the Boston Public Library, second largest book collection in the United States, behind the Library of Congress. They have about 150 copies, and a library card is free. Free being a word that doesn't get thrown around much up here. This is Beacon Hill, the namesake of Beacon Hilton here. It's one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city, and it is categorically the most expensive. How expensive exactly, I am literally not supposed to tell you. There's nothing stopping anybody here from firing up Zillow whenever you want, but the HOA up here has made it pretty clear they don't really like us talking about housing prices. But down on Boston Common, the Frog Pond, that's free. Couple inches deep, it's a splashing pool. It's a good way for kids to beat the summer heat when it inevitably starts feeling like August again. Eventually, summer will end, the temperature will start to plummet down to something nice and frosty, like I prefer. Come winter, they'll just erect a steel railing around the perimeter of that pond. They will let it freeze over, and it becomes a nice skating rink. And off to our left, well, on the front lawn, you've got our 35th president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, from Brookline, Massachusetts. Behind that, Massachusetts State House. This is where our current governor, Maura Healey, has her office. First woman we have ever elected governor in the state's history. Eventually, of course, her term will be up. The big white doors at the top of these steps will open. You'll see them momentarily. Maura Healey will come down the steps. She will cross the street. She will pass by the Robert Gould Shaw 54th Memorial, coming up off to our right. Then proceed down onto Boston Common, where she will symbolically become a regular citizen again, a commoner, if you will. The Robert Gould Shaw Memorial, by the way, is dedicated to the first all-volunteer African-American military unit, raised and trained here in the North to fight in the South during the American Civil War, and their commander, Robert Gould Shaw. If any of you ever saw a 1989 Civil War movie called Glory, it was all about those guys, and you see that right at the very end. If you haven't, you really should. It's a great movie. Massachusetts Firefighters Memorial, off to our left. Dedicated to every Commonwealth of Massachusetts firefighter who's ever lost their lives in the line of duty. Although the earliest names would be Boston specifically. The Boston Fire Department, founded in 1678, was the first paid professional fire department in the country. Honestly, the fact that this city is almost 400 years old means it got in on the ground floor of a couple of things. Does anybody here like chocolate? I have been assured Boston had the first chocolate factory in the United States. You ever heard of something called the Toll House cookie? That was us. This question tends to be extremely hit or miss. I keep thinking about maybe not asking it anymore, but do we have any gamers on board? You ever play Fallout 4? Oh, you missed out. You got to traipse through the radiated ruins of nuclear post-apocalyptic Boston. You get shot at constantly, chased around by radiation zombies. The main town in that setting is something called Diamond City, because it's built within the walls of Fenway Park. You meet a character named Piper, runs a newspaper called Public Occurrences, which is based on a real-life Boston newspaper called Public Occurrences, both foreign and domestic. A little bit of a mouthful. Almost any English teacher today would tell you every word of that title was spelled wrong. I think I would have enjoyed the English language a little bit better back when it was still kind of multiple choice. There was a time you could spell murder with a Y and a TH and nobody cared. But that was the first multi-page newspaper in the colonies back in 1690. Oh, hey, we got kids. This is the Old West Church. This used to be a stop on the Underground Railroad here in Boston. It's a daycare center now. Oh, cool. About a month ago now, I was giving a tour for some slightly older kids. A bunch of 7th or 8th graders playing a little scavenger hunt. They had a list of items they were waiting for me to talk about, I guess to prove to their teachers that they were paying attention. The teacher promised me they weren't being graded on it, but she did show me a copy of that list. I was scrolling down it to help them out with it. Most of it was pretty straightforward, but I did pause when I got to an entry that read, and I quote, "The ugliest building in America." Not very nice, but yes, I knew which one they meant. The Hurley Building. It's a stunning example of what we call brutalist architecture. For some reason, that was big back in the 70s. In real life, that houses our Department of Mental Health Services. But if you ever saw a Scorsese film called The Departed, they used that as Massachusetts State Police Headquarters. One moment. Similar thoughts, huh? Off to our right, technically this is the Tip O'Neill Federal Building, but directly behind it is TD Garden. If you ever want to see the Bruins or the Celtics playing a home game, this would be the place. Last year, this is where the Celtics broke their tie with the Lakers when they won championship number 18. This year was not quite so successful, but that's all right. I am more than old enough to still remember very distinctly what it felt like being a Red Sox fan prior to 2004. I'm not about to turn around and start complaining that my basketball team isn't dominating the sport hard enough. The Celtics win slightly more often than anyone else, and I can be content with that. Leonard P. Zinkum, Bunker Hill Memorial Bridge off to our right. To my knowledge, still the widest cable-stayed bridge in the United States. Carries all 10 lanes of Interstate 93 over the water. It's the crown jewel of something called the Big Dig, a little public works project that we drove over at the beginning of the tour, and we'll drive over once more at the very end of the tour. It was, at the time of its completion, and may, for all I know, still be, the most expensive public works project in American history. 16 years and $21 billion, took a 6-lane elevated highway and turned that into a 10-lane underground highway. Now, one thing, bear in mind, that figure does factor in interest, and whatever the actual number you want to put on it, it's paying off for you folks now. When this thing was built back in the 50s, the designers apparently didn't think easy direct road access from one side to the other was going to be a priority. This thing was basically a wall that choked off about 2 miles of Boston's waterfront for 50 years, and it ran right along Atlantic, the first street we crossed over when we left the aquarium. Prior to 2003, this would be a tour of the aquarium parking lot, and it wasn't even a nice parking lot back then. Because it was so much harder to access the waterfront back then, the city of Boston did not make nearly as much of a priority of taking care of it properly. They figured, who cares, it's not anyone sees it anyway. By 2003, that whole area was kind of a decrepit, rundown dump. But as soon as that highway came down, that was all open again. It became prime real estate again, pretty much overnight. Cleaning it up wasn't overnight, of course, but they've gotten it looking pretty nice these days. Another one. So, around the corner, I should probably introduce you to a few friends of mine coming up. Wait for it. Okay. May I present to you Tyrannosaurus Rex, King of the Dinosaurs. Esplanadia, Kenmore Carla, Waterfront Fonda, Miss Emma Science, Beantown Betty, Olga Ironside, and I guess that's it. The Museum of Science is one of our 3 duck stops, and more importantly, it is one of the top tourist destinations in either Boston or Cambridge, and for good reason. If you haven't visited this place before, and you have a chance to do it, I would make it a priority. The dinosaur exhibit alone would be worth the price of admission. They got a lot more than dinosaurs. About 3 weeks ago, I stuck up around after work for a 7 o'clock showing of Superman at the Ugar Omni Theater. It was good, by the way. It was really, really good. Right, Big Mike? He's a Snyderverse guy. But I usually assume on just about any tour, most everyone on board can probably be grouped into one of two categories. A dinosaur fan, or a dinosaur fan who is lying to me. You never needed Scarlett Johansson to sell dinosaurs. I mean, that helps, but every kid loves dinosaurs. That is in our DNA. It's just in an awkward but inevitable quirk of biology. Kids become teenagers. Teenagers worry maybe it's not cool anymore. They act like they're over it, because if they start talking about their favorite dinosaur, their friends will laugh at them. Well, I don't have any friends. So at 43 years old, there is nothing stopping me from telling you Triceratops is still my favorite. They got both a real, complete fossil and a replica in there. I'm sure there's also a Velociraptor somewhere. That thing's been pretty popular ever since Jurassic Park came out, 32 years ago. Although, PSA, if you didn't know this already, Velociraptor was about the size of a golden retriever. Michael Crichton lied to you. Triceratops, that one's the real deal. I'm guessing some of you have probably heard of the Berlin Wall before, and therefore are aware that if you want to see that in person, kind of tricky today. They tore it down when I was 7. But if you take a gander off to your left, greenish concrete slab, guy with the blue hat, you're looking at a little piece of the West Berlin side right now. Kind of hard to get around that thing on a duck boat, but you're not really missing much on the Soviet side. They weren't very big fans of street art. You guys want to spend some time out on the river? We can do that. But a couple safety pointers we just have to go over first. All the land safety stuff still applies on the river. But also, if you look up, we've got life vests. Leave them alone unless Big Mike tells you to put them on. But if Big Mike does tell you that, anybody weighing 90 pounds or less will need one of these little vests up here with the dark tags. Most of them are up here on my side, but we've got 10 more in the very back. If you weigh more than 90 pounds, full-size vests have yellow tags. I promise I will talk about the Lynch Family Skate Park later. But if there is a fire on board, I've got a fire extinguisher. If somebody falls overboard, not to worry, I've got a life ring right here. There's backups to both under and behind the leftmost rear seat. And while in 31 seasons we have never actually lost one of these things, a duck boat sinking is theoretical in Boston. But since it is theoretically possible, there is a protocol for it. Roof retracts, windshield bolts down, windows are already open. If Big Mike ever actually gave the order to abandon ship, these would be your primary emergency exits. Now you're just going to hear the horn blast for a second or two on the way down. And then the fun part. Okay, I'm pretty sure that went well. Okay, it went well. Driving into the water is the easy part. You can do that in a Ford Fiesta. But the rumbling you hear means that our propeller's working, which is good. Wouldn't make it very far without them. You will note this thing is turning, even though our wheels are completely useless. I guess the rudders are working. And I didn't want to call it prematurely, but we're not sinking. If it floats and it goes somewhere, congratulations, you're on a boat. Welcome to the Charles River. Excellent. So, yes. Charles River, by the way, proud to tell you, it's the cleanest urban river in the United States. A- rating from the Environmental Protection Agency. I'm especially pleased to tell you that, given that it was not always the case. It's an A- rating from the EPA today. Back in the 70s, it was a straight D. People used to say that if you ever fell into the Charles River, you were going to need to get yourself a tetanus shot afterwards. That was never true. That's not how tetanus works. You could get it from the water. Getting the shot after the tetanus doesn't help you. but was pretty gross once. People used to say this was the filthiest river in the country. That was never true either. The only actual F rating I've ever heard of went to a river running through Cleveland, Ohio called the Cuyahoga. It earned that F rating when it caught fire. Not once, not twice, but 13 times. Water is not flammable. Prior to the Clean Water Act of 1972, some of the stuff you could still get away with dumping into the water. Very much was. Slightly jealous, if I'm being honest. Not that I wish the Charles River was catching fire or anything, but it would have been kind of cool to see that just once. A river burning is kind of like a heavy metal cover. If you throw a boat on there, that's what we call a Viking throw. But as far as boats on the river, we drove into the river and we're still going. One of those old town trolley buses that tried that little trick. The only thing that bus would be good for would be insurance fraud. So what's your verdict on these things? Kind of cool, right? It's an oldie but a goodie. Beacon Hilda here is a modern replica of an 83-year-old design, which mechanically speaking at least hasn't really changed that much. Hi Jesse! Alright, hasn't really come up today. Back during the Second World War, starting in 1942, General Motors cranked out about 21,000 of these things for the U.S. military. General Motors called it a DUKW. It was kind of a convoluted manufacturer's designation. Technically had nothing to do with the animal. But since it operated on land and water, the Allies just called it the Duck. Whenever they had to offload troops or supplies over the water, but there was no dock to offload onto, this thing was your answer. All a duck boat needs is a shoreline. Drives up the land, and it's a cargo truck. So take those supplies wherever they're needed, just like any other cargo truck. Horn blast coming up in a moment, by the way. 4 times on the water portion, we approach a blind corner. If Big Mike doesn't see what's on the other side, he just assumes somebody is coming, and legally he announces our approach. One thing I can tell you is waiting for us around this corner is more room, less traffic as we come out onto the Charles River proper. Also, I happened to notice when I got on this dock, we have a few kids on board. Under those circumstances, we are able to relax on the safety rules just a little. Let me explain this. Big Mike has not abandoned this post. He is not committing any Coast Guard violation at all. He can still reach the steering wheel, he can still drive. But the captain's chair is temporarily vacant, and that is the best view on the entire dock, because the captain has to see everything. So if any of our younger guests would like to be captain for a second, see what the captain sees, get a taste of command, well, I'll take that as a yes. But there are a couple conditions. One junior captain at a time. Can't have multiple people standing and crowding the helm. But that one junior captain can bring up one photographer, get this documented so you can brag to your friends about it later. If we call on anyone where there are multiple kids in their group, we'll finish that group so the photographer doesn't have to do laps. But if you sit in that chair, you are agreeing to take a sticker. Are those terms acceptable? Then come on up. And bring your chronicler with you. How about a show of hands? Who all would like to try this after the first one? Is it a one and done? We sure back there? I see a couple kids back there. Alright, let me know if they change their minds. How about up here? Any you want to try it? It's not mandatory, don't worry. Although, you know, what do you think? What do I tell you? It's not a bad view, right? Well, you did your part, and a deal's a deal. Whenever you're ready, here is your badge of office. Watch your step on the way down. First one's a bit of a doozy. Talk them into it. All right, once the way's clear, come on up. We got just one captain at a time, but a photographer can come up as well. That's Cambridge, Massachusetts, off to our right. I believe I mentioned earlier, that's the home of Harvard and MIT. You'll have to take my word for it on Harvard, though. To show you Harvard, we'd have to drive so far downriver that it gets so shallow we would essentially be driving again, and it would still be further inland. None of that would technically stop at Duck Boat, but it would have us a little late back to the aquarium. So I think I think that you'd probably have to see that one on your own. MIT, on the other hand, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, that one is right along the shore. I hear we had another back there who wanted to try it. Set them up. You can't see MIT yet, but you will right off to your right as soon as we clear the Longfellow Bridge up ahead. How we doing? Here you go. Thank you. All right. And oh, we talked him into it. All right, send him up. Sometimes once we get a volunteer or two, that kind of gets the ball rolling. That beige building off to our left, by the way, sticking up beyond the trees, that's the Massachusetts Eye and Ear Infirmary. #1 rated specialty hospital in the world. Part of the campus of Mass General Hospital. And MGH overall is no slouch. First in-house x-ray wing of any hospital. Thank you, well done. Of course, first successful limb reattachment back in 1967. 1830s, they pioneered the use of ether as a surgical anesthetic. Prior to these guys coming along, the best they could do for you was all the whiskey you could drink. Maybe not the worst thing I've ever heard, but progress is progress. By the way, you can't see it yet, but if you kind of keep your gaze peeled off to the left, it's going to come into view beyond the trees very shortly. You've got a nice little view of Beacon Dome there. You're very welcome. Where you'll see 13 pounds of 23-karat gold leaf gilding the State House dome. Starting to see it right now. Anybody else? All right, Big Mike, looks like it's your show. You're new captain. Well done. Yeah, not a bad little view. $350,000 worth of gold. Certainly caught my eye when I first showed up here. But you want to know what really got my attention when I showed up here? The Henry Wadsworth Longfellow Bridge, opened in 1916, named for the poet who made Paul Revere a nationally famous name in 1860. One of my land, two of my sea, Paul Revere Drive. Locals sometimes like to call this the Salt and Pepper Bridge because of the shape of those turrets up there. But for me, the real action is closer to the water line. Those boats you see carved on the side of the bridge are not just boats. Those are Viking longships. You'll see two more on the far side, and they are not just there to look cool. They are there to look cool. But there is a story behind this, and I will get into it on the way back. There's a few things on the far side of the bridge I think you might want to see first, but definitely going to talk about that. Right then. So, as soon as we clear the bridge, Massachusetts Institute of Technology directly off to our right. And if you find yourself wondering which building I'm talking about, not Google. But other than that, pretty much all of them. Alma mater of 44 astronauts and counting, one of whom I am told is up in space literally right now. They stretch out for about a mile along the Cambridge side. They've done pretty well for themselves. Back in Boston, and if you can make out that big red triangle, that is a very famous Cinco sign. Fenway Park, home of the Boston Red Sox. He is immediately to the left of it. Oldest professional baseball stadium in the country. It opened up in 1912. Didn't get too much attention then because the Titanic went down that same week. Kind of a headline hogger. But 9 World Series wins later. We've got some happy memories to show for it there. By the way, there hasn't been a Citgo station anywhere near that for ages. people just really got used to seeing that over the outfield wall whenever the Sox were playing a home game. This is an almost comically sentimental town. It's the only reason that's still there. And this is the Back Bay, the neighborhood that we skirted earlier. 200 years ago, none of this was here. Not the buildings, not the ground that they are built on. At its widest point, the Charles River used to be almost 2 miles across. Now, you might have noticed the sailboats. They're probably coming out of here. This boathouse here is the oldest public sailing school in the United States. Community Boating Incorporated, opened back in 1946. A couple times a year, they will train a Boston resident between the ages of 10 and 18 in the fine art of sailing for as little as $1 for the entire summer. Obviously, that's not something they can do for everybody, but it's a tremendous opportunity for a lot of kids. Some of you might have played a little bit of a part in it, because when you bought your tickets, whether you bought them in person or online, hopefully an option was presented to you. Would you like to throw in an extra dollar for charity? Every time a guest decides that yes, they would like to do that, this company matches it for something called the Quack Quack Give Back Program. Cutesy name, I know, but it's an important charitable initiative. That school is one of 6 beneficiaries. The 3 main causes have always been education, clean water, and veterans affairs. I went on about education earlier. It's been a big deal here ever since the Puritan days. I'll be pretty clear why we care about clean water. It takes as much effort to keep the river this clean as it did to get it this way. We work with some very excellent corporate partners there. As for Veterans Affairs, do we have any military veterans on board or active duty military service granting members by any chance? Fair enough. It's what the signatures up there are about. Like I was explaining, duck boats started out as military vehicles, kind of in the company's DNA. So, with the exception of an occasional pro athlete who's just won a championship for us, did any of you win a Super Bowl for us? All right, fair enough. Usually military veterans. Kind of our way of saying, thanks for letting us use your boat. 80 plus years later, still pretty cool, and thanks for everything else. But, we don't have any of those. Let's talk Viking ships. Has anybody here heard the name Leif Erikson before? Alright, fair few of you. Good. I get a little salty occasionally about that name not being more famous. It's a famous name. There's a Leif Erikson Day and everything. But everybody knows who Christopher Columbus was. I'll tell you who Christopher Columbus was. A complete overrated hack. Back in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Good for him. But that grade school rhyme is missing a verse about how he sailed around the Caribbean for a while and somehow mistook that for India. Everyone gives him a free pass on that because making it across the Atlantic at all was such a big deal back then. But what have I told you? My people pulled off something similar 500 years earlier with Dark Ages technology, and they did a better job. That is what I'm telling you, because that's what happened. A lot of what we still know about the Viking Age, Norse mythology, all of that, a lot of it comes from something we call the Icelandic sagas, first put to writing in the 1200s. And it contains 2 stories, the Saga of the Greenlanders and the Saga of Eric the Red. These 2 are basically the same story, just with some differences in tone and detail. It recounts how centuries before the time of writing, right about the year 1000, a Viking longship was blown off course while sailing west for Greenland, the most distant Norse settlement of the day. A couple weeks later, Leif Erikson and crew were all kinds of confused when they sighted North America instead. Did not know that was there. But it's there, they see it, it's big, and they realize this a lot quicker than Columbus, it's new. Nobody's seen this before. Nobody they know of anyway. So they take a good look around. They sail further and further south down the coast until they come to a place that the sagas call Vinland, described as something of a paradise. Clean, warm, and verdant. Fine place for people to settle. if they can just make it out here. They take a stab at settlement later, but in their initial explorations, one of them stumbles upon something interesting. Wild grapes growing by the vine. I will give you exactly one guess what Vikings did with grapes. That's why they call it Vinland, the land of wine. In the 19th century, academics up here took an interest in these old sagas again, and they got curious about something. How hardy are grapes? How far north would those grow without humans helping it along? Because they reasoned if Vikings saw that, then they must have made it at least that far south. Their guess at the time was this far. And this gave them the theory. Finland and New England are the same place. Vikings were here 1,000 years ago. Their ships were here. So in 1916, they carved stone Viking ships on that bridge to celebrate the real Viking ships, which they believed had been sailing on those same waters about 900 years earlier. Now that is a cool story, but this is a history tour. So the question has to be asked, was any of that ever actually true? Turns out it is a strong, resounding maybe. Were the Vikings ever in New England? You don't know. Maybe. If they were here, we're still looking for the hard evidence to prove that. It is speculation, but it is plausible speculation, because Vikings in North America has been confirmed historic fact for 65 years now. If you ever make your way up into Canada, there is a national park about 1,000 miles from here. It's called Lanceau Meadows, right at the very northern tip of Newfoundland. Back in 1960, a Norwegian couple by the name of Helga and Anne Steinkingston excavated the confirmed remnants of a Viking settlement there. So far, it is still the only confirmed site in North America. But they did carbon date it to around the year 1000. My people were here, right when the saga said. First known Europeans ever to see this part of the world. Big Mike needs to do another little horn blast. I'll be with you in 1 second. What's kind of interesting, but also a little infuriating about the whole thing is we know there have to be other Viking sites out there awaiting discovery. Because one thing they found at that site was the sawn log of a butternut tree, which does not grow that far north. It had to have been brought there from further south. How far exactly? Was it from here? Maybe. I like to think my people were here, but can I prove it? Sadly, no. From behind the tree, you'll get a better view of this back on dry land, but if you look up ahead off to your left at about 11 o'clock, you get not a bad little view of the Bunker Hill Monument rising up beyond that highway over in Charlestown. Looks just like the Washington Monument, but I assure you we did not rip off Washington. Our version is 41 years older. Bunker Hill Monument commemorates the Battle of Bunker Hill, June 17, 1775. Bloodiest battle of the entire Revolutionary War. Between 2,200 and 3,000 British soldiers marched up that hill 250 years ago. Managed to capture it from about 700 local militia laying siege to the city, but at the cost of just over 1,000 men dead or wounded. But reinforcements are 3,000 miles away. That is a bloody nose that gets some attention. Oh. Engine going silent is not an issue, but it does mean that the last horn blast is coming up in not too terribly long. It also means that Big Mike has just activated one of our more important features, all-wheel drive. Of the 6 wheels down there, it is usually the rear wheels that provide the steering power. That works fine on land. But until we are fully back up under that ramp, those aren't doing us much good back there. Power has been directed to the front wheels as well, because they've got a job ahead of them. When I was joking earlier about this thing being essentially bulletproof, what I meant is solid steel, about a 1/4 inch thick. It's gutsy stuff, but heavy. If this thing was empty, it would still weigh about 29,000 pounds. We are about the opposite of empty right now. 2 wet wheels have to lug all that weight up that equally wet ramp. It's only for a couple seconds until the rear wheels join in. That still takes a gutsy engine, and it takes some pretty decent tire treads. Let's see how ours are holding up. Well, looks like the right direction so far. And we just ran out of water. That's pretty encouraging. Ladies and gentlemen, we are a bus. And now that bus will take us back to the aquarium, where sadly we must bid you fine folks a fond farewell. But it's still about 15 minutes off. Not quite out of stuff to talk about just yet. The Lynch Family Skate Park, I said I'd talk about that later. That is just shy of 40,000 square feet. A measurement which I am told makes that the largest skating park we have here in New England. It's a claim I kind of have to take at face value, since I have not been on a skateboard personally since I was about 10 years old. And short of a gun to my head, I am not trying that one again. Remember I was telling you about that thing, the Frog Pond, back on Boston Common, how that's a skating rink in the winter? About 12 years ago, my brother talked me into trying that out with him. I don't know how, I'd never been ice skating in my life. Well, maybe it was easier than it looked. It wasn't. It wasn't exactly the most dignified half hour of my life, but still better than the last time I got on a skateboard. The soccer field, that one maybe I can handle. Smallest I've ever seen, and you know what? That speaks to me. When it comes to sports, I have my favorite teams. Who doesn't? But there's a pretty big gulf between watching a game and trying to participate. Even at the purely amateur level, especially if you hate running, which I do. I've known that about myself pretty much my entire life. Given that my knees aren't getting any younger, I seriously doubt I'll wake up with a sudden fondness for it tomorrow. So ordinarily, I think last time I played soccer was probably the last time my parents made me play soccer, which would put that conservatively at about 30 years ago. But that soccer field, no real running required. One good kick, probably do it. Although to be fair, not wanting to run doesn't completely rule out sports. I've tried a few. You know, it's funny. Didn't know anything about it until I saw that bag. Sailing. That's totally a sport. Not really a running sport, but it's a sport. There's a rowing, kayaking, cycling, horseback riding, and I have tried a few. Anyone here ever tried archery? Archery is fantastic. You stand like this. Not run, not walk, you stand. You keep that target at a nice profile. You only have to keep one eye open. Most of us have a dominant hand. We also have a dominant eye that you want to use for shooting. It does not always line up with the side of your dominant hand, although it makes it a lot easier if it does. I kind of lucked out that way. Quack, quack. A lot of people, like when they first started, one thing they wonder, unless they're using one of those really fancy compound bows with a sight, they wonder, how do you aim with this thing? You don't. That's the beauty of it. If you're standing right, if you're holding the thing right, pretty much wherever you put that eye, the arrow tends to follow. But for all that, very much a sport. I would say archery is really good for the satisfaction